Welcome everyone to the University of Arizona Museum of Art's At the Table Speaker Series. And my name is Chelsea Farrar. I'm the Curator of Community Engagement for the UA Museum of Art. And thank you all for being here tonight. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. At the institutional level, we must be proactive in broadening awareness throughout campus and beyond to ensure our students and community members feel represented and valued. And in this virtual format, I know that many of our participants and our guests here today are joining us from across the United States, maybe even outside of. And so I encourage you to learn what Indigenous lands you inhabit. And I'd love to see where folks are joining us from. And if you know what those Indigenous lands are, please add that to the chat. It would be great to see where everyone is joining us from tonight. And a big thank you to our UA Museum of Art members who make events such as this possible. If you are not yet a member, it's a great way to support the arts in our community, and it also gives you access to special events, tours, and talks that are not available to the public, such as this one. Memberships also make a great holiday gift, so just a little suggestion for your future holiday shopping. A membership won't be stuck on a cargo ship. And you can find more information about joining on our website or reach out to Natasha Allen, the museum membership coordinator, and we'll drop a link to the membership page in the chat. And this talk tonight is part of our At the Table series, which is being offered this season in conjunction with the museum's current exhibition, The Art of Food, from the collections of Jordan D. Snitcher and his Family Foundation, which is open now through March 20th of 2022. These talks are meant to expand on some of the themes in the exhibition, which includes still life, eye candy, control, and more. The exhibition includes over 100 artists from our modern and contemporary era, responding to the topic of food and our relationship to it. And many of the artists you might be familiar with, such as Andy Warhol, and there's many more that we can't wait for you to learn about. The exhibition is open until March 20th, as I said, and you can visit our website for more information, as well as information on our holiday, our winter closure hours. And so tonight's talk is the last in the series for fall 2021, but if you missed any of our previous talks, there is no need to fret because all of our talks are recorded and available on the UA Museum of Art's YouTube page, as well as this one will be available in about a week or so. So if you subscribe to the page, you'll also get notified when this talk or previous talks are added. And this spring, we'll have 3 more public talks, which are in conjunction with the Art of Food exhibition. And you can find out more information about those dates and speakers coming soon to our events page, and will be announced in our museum newsletter, which you can sign up for on our website as well. All right, so really quick, just a little housekeeping. You are able to join in, and we want you to join in on the conversation and talk today and engage with our speakers as well as myself. And you can use the chat, which is the button at the bottom of your window, and you can share any comments or questions during the talk, and we'll definitely have some time for questions and answers at the end. We always hope for a lively and engaging experience for everyone, so please definitely add any comments or personal connections that you hear, and then questions, and we'll share those with the speakers at the end. And if you have any issues with internet connection, you can also join us on our Facebook page. We are live streaming this talk to the museum's Facebook page right now. And we always ask in these meeting formats on Zoom that in order to help reduce bandwidth issues, that our audience keep their videos off at least until during the talk, and then the Q&A, everyone can turn back on their videos. If you have any issues during the talk, reach out to myself or Chris Weir or Jill McCleary. They're all here as co-host, and you can message any one of us for any technical help. Thank you for your help, Jill and Chris. So tonight we are thrilled to welcome Drs. Hope Schau and Matt Mars. Dr. Matt Mars is a longtime colleague of the UA Museum of Art, often bringing his classes to visit our galleries or working with our curator, Olivia Miller, to select prints to view with his class. And when we were putting together this season's list of speakers who could offer an interdisciplinary take on this exhibition, Olivia and I knew right away that we wanted to reach out to Dr. Mars, and we were just elated when he also suggested including his colleague, Dr. Schau. So Matthew Mars is an associate professor of leadership and innovation in the University of Arizona College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Matthew's research focuses on how entrepreneurial logics and strategies become embedded in and influence academic cultures, community development initiatives, and social movements. Dr. Mars has published in a range of academic journals that include Agricultural and Human Values, Community Development, Higher Education, Journal of Higher Education, Journal of Management Inquiry, Minerva, Review of Higher Education, and Rural Sociology. And Hope Jensen Schau is Eller Professor of Marketing at the University of Arizona's Eller College of Management. Hope's research focuses on market practices, consumption journeys, brand building, integrated marketing communications, the impact of technology on marketplace relations, and collaborative value creation. She is president-elect of Consumer Culture Theory Consortium, an associate editor at the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science, an area editor for the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, and the Journal of Business Research. Thank you both so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll get our groove. Thank you, Chelsea. That was a fabulous introduction. And Hope and I both wanted to echo the acknowledgments that you so kindly and graciously included at the start of the talk. And we're also grateful to be included in this series and to have the opportunity to partner with such great colleagues at the museum here on campus, and also the community broadly defined. So Hope and I have been on this journey of studying the local food movement and how it relates to alternative market spaces for, I'm going to say, nearly a decade. I don't think it's quite a decade yet, but it's close. And it started with a curiosity and a deep interest in better understanding how what is widely viewed as a very diverse set of actors and agendas, how they converge in what is seemingly a relatively ungoverned or unregulated movement, which is the local food movement, and what brings that to life and what brings meaning. And so we've been studying that for a good bit of time. And we would be remiss if we also didn't acknowledge that we've had a PhD student who has joined us on a good deal of this journey. And her name is Tyler Thorpe. And Tyler has been instrumental in much of this work. So we certainly wanted to acknowledge Tyler and thank her for her great work, and to also recognize that she's a fabulous emergent scholar. And so a name to pay attention to. But with that said, we appreciate you indulging us in a conversation this evening. We are delighted to be able to come up from air, so to speak, and put down the pen and paper and all the writing that we've been doing on this work, and actually have a conversation and reorient ourselves to some of the things that we've been thinking about. And what a fabulous way to do that around such a beautiful exhibit and an inspiring set of art. And so Chelsea and Olivia and the team at the museum, we thank you very much. So with that said, we'll dive into some of the propositions and provocations that we have to share with you tonight, and hope that we can spark some interesting conversation. And so with that said, Hope, do you want to move us along?
Can we see the right? Are you seeing the screen as it should be seen? Just checking out. It's the whole.
Yes, we see the front slide, the first slide.
Perfect.
That's a good start.
You never know. You never know how this is going to go. So I do want to thank everybody at the museum. This has been we've been thinking about food for a long time. The exhibit has some beautiful pieces in it, which we will kind of reference more explicitly toward the end of our talk, but it's a thrill to have a chance to talk to people about our research. We are doing some of the same things that you see in the exhibit, and we're thinking about the narratives that surround food and the representations of food. So just like the artistic representations and the stories you see in the exhibit, that's we'd like to echo that when we do our presentation here. So we want to begin with a proverb.
Yeah, so this is a Hopi proverb, and it is those who tell the stories rule the world. And why we wanted to begin with that is we have been very keenly attentive to the idea of storytelling as a strategy for advocating, advancing the many agendas that drive the local food movement, as we'll get into a little bit deeper in a few slides, is that it's very diverse, and there's a number of really inspirational and powerful forces that are coming together around the notion of local food. But we think that meaning and power is dependent on the stories that are told, and are concerned that oftentimes those stories are lost in day-to-day practices and everyday struggles, and how markets ultimately are set up and evolve over time. And so we're keenly focused on storytelling. And so this proverb certainly speaks to that sense of bringing meaning and power to the movement and the impact that it aims to have.
Yeah, I think we want to highlight too that the stories that are told, the people who are allowed to tell the story, that have a pen, who have the means to create the stories, end up having a lot of power in the marketplace, from my perspective, but also in the world. So the stories are non-trivial. The fact that we think about food as something that we do, we eat food, but food is a lot more. It's about culture, it's about heritage, it's about a local economy. And so kind of just thinking through all the voices, the multivocal sense of what food is. So that kind of brings us to a question, and it sounds really simple at first, doesn't it? What is local food? And I'm pretty sure that if we were to ask everybody in this room right now, they would have an understanding of what local food is. And I have a suspicion that it would not be the same as in the marketplace. I would have a suspicion that, in fact, it's a lot more complicated than it looks. So we think local food, food that is locally derived. And so I don't know, do you want to add?
Yeah, I would just say, what is local food? It's an interesting question, in the sense that maybe how you might have answered that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would be entirely different than what you might respond to now. So there's a number of iterations of the local food movement. So from farm to table, where we see the restaurant industry being much more active, where we see, and spoiler alert, we'll look to some more conventional market spaces a little later in terms of how local food is being presented there, that maybe blur or complicate, or perhaps even, if we wanted to be very, very provocative,
Annihilate.
Annihilate. I was actually going to say co-opt, or annihilate the notion of local food. So at one point in time, we would think farmers markets, U-pick stands, maybe some progressive community shared or community supported agriculture shares. But that's just a piece of the pie now. And so this has become much more complicated. And so too has the story. If there is indeed a story, it seems as though there are multiple stories now, and not all stories. I guess it's like an Orwell, right? Is all stories are equal, just some are more equal than others, right? Kind of a play on that.
Agreed. And so this is probably, I also want to give a little spoiler alert that these are images from our data. And these, the data that we'll show you won't show you specific quotes of people pictured, but we will be showing you definitely brands that you will see in the marketplace. And as long as they're in the marketplace, they're fair game to have a conversation about. This is what we typically think of when we think about local food. I think this is probably the image that comes to mind most. It's locally farmed and produced in Southern Arizona, in our case. and sold at Tucson farmers markets. And it looks like this. We would expect it. I think this is probably what the expected thoughts are.
Yeah, and you can of course look at this. If you looked really closely, you might see some things that don't belong as well. And we thought that, and they're kind of in the background, but they're there. So like the kiwi fruits, I think we see in the back. Maybe some of you, if you're not in Tucson or you're around the world, maybe you have a kiwi tree, I guess.
But we do not.
But if you're in Southern Arizona, I'm guessing, in fact, I'm pretty confident you do not. And so what we start to see is in the forefront is what we think of with local food, right?
Correct.
But in the background, there are these other kind of misfits that are being slowly integrated into this notion of local. And I know we first became aware of this in our field work, seeing locally grown avocados.
Yes, that was what triggered us to thinking that perhaps it's a little more complicated. So exactly, even the most basic image that we want to look at tonight about what is local food, upon closer inspection, is a lot more complicated.
Yeah, and just for those of you that are not in Southern Arizona, avocados do not grow.
No.
And if you were growing avocados,
note to you, that's not going to turn out well.
No, and it's going to be incredibly irresponsible, I would say, because it's going to probably take far more water than we have to spare, which is zero in our desert landscape and home. So just trying to acknowledge that there might be some folks that are not familiar with Southern Arizona, and that's our empirical context, which is a rich one, because Tucson and Southern Arizona is, we're proud of our 4,000 plus year history of food and agriculture, being a UNESCO city of gastronomy. Local food is a prominent point of conversation and pride here, but we will be mindful throughout that there are some folks that might not necessarily know the context in which we're looking a little more closely and critically at.
Yeah, so we are thinking about this in terms of being a little critical. And I also want to give a little shout out to Tucson and Arizona in general. The reason that they could win an award like this is because we are thinking about local food. So just because we haven't expanded our imagining of what a market looks like doesn't mean that there's a unique problem to us. In fact, we are a community that is thinking about resolving some of these issues. So that's also something. So when we looked at the last picture, we saw that those were pictures of produce, and we understand that that's pretty much what we would imagine produce to look like. When we look at this picture, this is ranch, so it's livestock, and it was locally raised. That part is correct. But if you look closely, it'll say pork Boston butt roast. And just in case you wondered, that still is local, because that's just a term that's given to historically to butts that are named after the pork barrels. So it just happens that this was named at the time of the Revolutionary War, and it's associated with New England as a specialty. But this was indeed grown here in Tucson. So these cattle lived here. So something to think about is the picture that we thought was so simple in the beginning was more complicated. And the one that looks kind of complicated is actually quite simple.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to make a note of, is like when you think about local, it's hard to confine it to one particular space. So just what I'm thinking is I have no pride apparently in the moment, is I actually grew up in New England. And I had no idea. I learned this today.
You weren't proud of the Boston butts?
I didn't know, and I'm afraid my mom might be watching because she is a Bostonian, and so I'll have to ask her why I was never taught about Boston butts. But the interesting thing is, here we are talking local, but we're learning global. So it's not necessarily that these things are oppositional.
No.
Right. It's context and its meaning. And so we want to be really attentive to that, because it's important to work through the nuance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like in this particular picture, we see that this is grass-fed. We see that we have all natural chicken and pork and perhaps some lamb here, and they're nitrate-free, all kinds of value propositions about why it's important to be local that are not necessarily about being local. And that's where the story gets a little bit more complicated again. This is interesting because in this particular case, this purveyor right here in Tucson, he and his girlfriend dry process and packaged many different variety of things, and they are located at the farmer's market. So from tea to salad mixings, they reference that these recipes that they have come from their parents or come from their grandparents, but they don't talk about a specific heritage. They don't say that this is related to living in Tucson, to being maybe a member of a local community. They don't talk about what is important about handcrafting or how handcrafting would produce something different than multinational manufactured stuff. So that's interesting. If we look at the table there, it looks very homemade. And there might be a lot of things that they could say about this, but the value proposition here is not apparent to us. It's not apparent why anyone would be terribly interested in something that's locally produced, in this case, locally packaged and processed. And many of those things that you see on that table were absolutely not grown in Tucson.
Yeah, there's an interesting subplot that unfolds with this that I think ties in nicely with what we'll conclude with some of the pieces that inspired us in the exhibit. Is oftentimes when we probably all have wandered the aisles or the spaces that are farmers markets or the like, and have noticed that there is a certain charm about that haphazard or less than curated spaces and so on. And that's part of the authenticity and the experience of that type of market space. But at the same time, if you look closely, as we have, you'll start to see some mimicking of what you might begin to think about in a grocery store or in a supermarket.
And conversely, we see that the grocery stores, in order to show that it's local, will do these homey things, write signs by hand and some of these things. So we see a blurring.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know if Hope has had the same response to some folks that she shared our work with, but oftentimes I'll get pushback on this critique of merchandising or curating or what have you, is, well, they're not marketers and they don't have enough time. Their bandwidth is so short. And I'm compelled by that to a certain degree, but it's interesting. They are looking somewhere, right? And so it's an interesting thought experiment to think about, why is it that they're looking to the very marketplaces that they aim to either compete with or offset or counter. And so maybe the idea of looking to art
would be a better opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a little spoiler alert where we might go.
We might be saying that.
We might at the end, yes.
So this is again complicated. This purveyor lives in Southern Arizona, but his booth promises something that is not local food, and that's a taste of Maine. So some of you who frequent the farmers markets, you probably have seen him around. He's certainly active in the space. And that this brings into a different contestation of what's local. So the fact that he lives here and he resides in local Tucson is somehow makes it local food. But in fact, this is a taste of Maine, and lobster, for those of you who are trying to farm lobster here in Tucson in the desert, this won't end well for you, right?
The lobster.
Or the lobster. It's probably not going to be successful. So it's amazing how people who navigate the space as consumers and people who are market organizers and other purveyors navigate with ease the very, I don't know what you want to say, contestations of the space, right? The very juxtaposition of saying that this is local, but then also saying it's a taste of Maine. And they can move around these contradictions with absolute ease. Yeah. And although Matt and I don't, and Tyler, we kind of are like, wait, what just happened? But when you see the local food movement, they embrace this understanding of local that's very contextual and multivocal.
Yeah, and there is something to be said about, like, in this picture, and recognizing and understanding that certainly this is a case of small scale micro entrepreneurship.
Yes,
undoubtedly, and that is not something to dismiss.
That would contribute to the local economy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if they're saying it's local because it contributes to local economy, that is correct.
Or it's local because it's localized micro-wise, like
Yes.
scale-wise. That's also meaningful, but is that local food? And if it is or it is not, that may not be the point. The point is, how do we clarify that so that meaning and understanding and power can be added to this collective identity and effort. Yeah.
So now let's turn to something that, so up till now, we did have micro entrepreneurs offering things at the farmer's market. And this image you will probably recognize as Whole Foods in Tucson, Arizona. The definition of local for Whole Foods is either it happened nationally in the United States, or some products are within 500-mile radius of the store. So for those of us who are kind of thinking this through, that gets problematized pretty fast, because I believe you've seen the Alaskan fish that's offered in Tucson, and it's considered local. It's local because it's still in the United States. It's interesting because Mexico, which is far closer, would then not be local,
in that paradigm.
Would not be local. So that's interesting. They have kind of given us a sense by this wood that they put near it and the kind of script and then different fonts that they're playing with that notion that we saw in the real farmers markets of kind of a patchwork understanding of their promotions, right? And so they are mimicking, in this sense, we would argue that they are mimicking the farmers markets, just like we saw the farmers markets perhaps at times mimicking the grocery stores. And they're charging an absolute premium for these products that are, as we have just unfolded through 7 slides, unclear that they are actually different than the products that they sell on the other wall.
Right. And I just, so admittedly, I'm less empathetic or sympathetic to the supermarket plight of local, but there are some market realities or economic realities that we're certainly aware of and sensitive to when it comes to how local food is approached and set up. So, you know, if you are in a rural area where 500 miles
is a long
ways, but not very densely populated, right? Then there's a reality that scope becomes bigger, right?
Yeah.
And if you are relying on sourcing food as locally as possible, then maybe that 500-mile radius becomes more of a reality, because you have to be able to access what you need to run your business if you're a restaurateur or what have you. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we know there are some realities, and those realities are reflected by other people that write about local food. So there is no one definition. You'll see 250 miles, 500 miles to the, it depends. But the other piece is, you might be thinking, well, I mean, yeah, but look at the beautiful food, and is this such a bad thing? Maybe it's greater access. I would just remind you or bring your attention for just a moment to the idea of organic food, which organic food started as a movement, and it was very much a small scale micro movement, and over time has become a huge market in and of itself that is expensive.
And ironically, micro entrepreneurs cannot get certified, because, I mean, it's very difficult for them to get certified because of the cost that it entails to get certified. So, and we don't mean to necessarily say that the grocery stores are doing something wrong, or the farmers markets are doing something wrong. It's just interesting, as long as this notion is very flexible about what local means, then it's ripe for very different understandings of local, and perhaps even gratuitous understandings of local. When it's convenient, we call it local, and when it is inconvenient, we do not.
And we have talked about this, that over time, I think our concern is not so much as we look at who is being included in this local food narrative at the moment, but ultimately over time, who becomes excluded and at what cost.
And so to kind of, spoiler alert, to relate also to the exhibit, we see some of the people who are working the fields in those images of where the food comes from, and their inability to be written in the main narrative, right? They're kind of behind the scenes of that narrative. And in the art, they take center stage. And perhaps imitating art, we should think about foregrounding some of the backstory. So In this picture, which also occurs in Tucson and is related to a large retailer, it says that the provenance of this cheese is Point Reyes, California, and that is true. That is true. It's under a sign that says local, and it is 914 miles from Tucson, Arizona. So if we imagine that we were purchasing local food in order to facilitate and ignite the local economy, that would not necessarily be true at the production. It's perhaps true at the retailer space, but not true at the production site. So again, this is like, what is your motive for wanting local food, and are you actually achieving that goal?
Yeah.
This one is kind of funny because it's also appears next to the word local, and bananas, again, for those of us not familiar with Tucson, Arizona, it's not where we grow bananas.
We're not tropical.
we don't grow bananas
Yeah,
much
yeah,
here.
yeah.
It would be pretty
Not
difficult.
a tropical ecosystem.
So in case you were thinking, but these scholarships might be helping the local community. Those are also not going to the local community. So this is local or local adjacent in the store, but actually are not local to Tucson, Arizona, not the bananas and not the scholarships.
Right.
So that kind of leaves us with this question, which is, what is the local food value proposition? Why are people attracted to local food, and what do they intend to do when they are purchasing local food? And we have, just to give us, some of us who don't think about marketing all the time, we think about value propositions as a persuasive narrative. It's the way the firm says, this is the value that we have, to try to attract customers who want that value to pay money and or information in order to get it. And so we want to think about the fact that narratives organize the market material in order to facilitate this exchange. And this is happening at micro levels with the micro entrepreneurs and their consumers, and also at this industrial space of the grocery store. They're trying to show you what their value proposition is, and you are, as consumers, trying to decide whether you want to purchase that. And when you look at the local food movement, you can see that people attend to this for a lot of different reasons. So some people come to want local food because of health and wellness. So there are people who want nutrient-dense food in order to better fuel their bodies so that they feel better. There could be a motive of local economic development. So we want to give money that stays in our community, creates jobs and standard of living here in a local space. That could be very important to people. We might imagine that we want environmental sustainability, so that we want to grow food that actually should be grown in this area.
Not avocados.
Not avocados that take perhaps a lot of water. And we also might even put under that kind of the notion of an eco footprint. As if we don't move the food very far, then we don't create much of this in transportation, the eco footprint. So there's a lot of stuff even in the environmental stability. Sustainability, do you want to?
Yeah,
I'm talking too much.
No, you're not talking too much, but I'm actually, there's these kinds of talks and processing is so helpful when we're trying to make sense of all of this. So I have new ideas actually, as you were talking, but the idea, I think what's important about the local food value proposition is so we have environmental sustainability, where Hope was leaving off of, and the idea of how food is produced, how it is distributed, how it is consumed, and the impact that leaves on the environment. But sustainability also falls into the idea of economic sustainability, and where I'm increasingly concerned about the absence in a lot of the work on local food and thinking about value propositions and the agenda of local food is, where do the actual farmers and producers fall into this? And so I don't think it falls necessarily under local economic development, because that's the idea of bringing viability and vitality and prosperity to the community. But there is also some very harsh realities for those that are trying to relocalize the economy through their everyday work. And so there's a justice issue that goes with local food that, again, I become more and more concerned about as local food becomes more and more popular, less and less clear in terms of its meaning. who ultimately becomes excluded from that.
Mhm.
And it brings me back and I'm reminded of, as I know you are as well, Hope, of the implications of the local or of the organic food movement becoming industrialized, if you will, which I know that seems like an oxymoron, but it's not.
Yeah, and we
It
could
is
have a
not.
great conversation with you about how organic was micro
Yes,
and went
and-
macro. And when it went macro, it created a definition that by anybody's standard is not what
Yes.
it was initially intended.
Yeah.
I also want to think that we have the social cultural promotion. So that
Certainly here with the city of gastronomy.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it came from Tucson. These are the people who have inhabited, the indigenous people who have inhabited, the people who came throughout the years and inhabited, over generations who have inhabited, and these are their cultures and we want to preserve them. That's also a reason why somebody might
And tell
approach
those
that.
stories,
Mhm.
right? And then there's also there is a very real idea of social justice activism and thinking about the food system as a larger representation of inequities.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think what's interesting is that we've identified 5 kind of buckets of why somebody might be interested in local food as a proposition, why they might be willing to pay more, and why they might be willing to go out of their way to access this food. So now kind of thinking through the data, we
Mhm.
should say, the local food value narrative. So how does this play out? So if we were to go to, in this case, a particular farmer's market,
Mhm.
their mission, as they stated, our mission is to connect, educate, and empower our community. And it's interesting, like exactly whose community,
Mhm.
to create a vibrant food system that supports local food producers and proprietors, and that they're trying to build a resilient food system. That sounds great. It unites maybe all 5
Yeah.
of those value propositions. But what's interesting is when you start looking a little bit more carefully, this building a sustainable regional farm economy would seem to indicate that we should not be like growing avocados, that we should be growing food that's accustomed to being grown with the precipitation we have.
Right.
Yeah. So they've given so in order to help us, and I really appreciate the farmers market doing this, they're trying to help us understand who's a real farmer, who's a real rancher, and who's a real producer.
Mhm.
And so they have these badges, and that does help. Honestly, that does help consumers who are like, I'm not entirely certain how to ascertain whether this is real. And that's great.
Can I insert one
Yeah.
kind of perspective on this? Is it's a powerful and compelling mission, and one that is very easy to get behind, and we both are. The power of our work is trying to see how then that mission becomes illustrated and conveyed at the level of the everyday,
Mhm.
at the market, from booth to booth, vendor to vendor, site to site, right?
And then to imagine what the externalities of that are. So
Yes.
if we follow this, there are going to be externalities. Some of these externalities will mean that, say, certain foods like avocados, we don't get to eat as much of, and other food we must eat more of because there's only so much food, and it has some other implications.
Yes.
So this is how they define, and we're calling this narrative neglect. So this is at the farmer's market, and this is how they define farmer, rancher, and producer. And it says that they're involved and invested in planting, growing, and harvesting. So they do that. They do this themselves. That would make them micro entrepreneurs, right?
Mhm.
But really, they don't say anything. 80% of the market produced should be planted, grown, and harvested by the farmer. So we assume that that's here, and it doesn't mention local, but
Mhm.
I'm assuming that that must be local. When we get to the rancher, it says that they're actively involved and invested in ranch land that they control, which again would be about ownership and about being a micro entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And you can get kind of caught up in how that somebody who doesn't then own the land may not be then a local rancher. And then there's producers, they sell processed and value added foods. And if they sell processed and value added foods, where did that food come from?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are great classifications and they're a great start, but they're not a great end. So we have to keep iterating this because that's problematic. We could see people who are renting land being not classified as ranchers, even though they're farming, working, having cattle, all of that,
Yeah.
doing all the work. And we can imagine people getting written out of the narrative of this food.
I think there's another interesting point to this that, as again, I'm learning as we're going and thinking about this, and we've been thinking about this for years, and it's such a complicated topic that every time we talk about it, more comes out. But also with this narrative neglect, if you look at these categories, and this is just one example of a number of different ways that you see badging and so on, is it would not be all that hard for some of the pictures we showed you earlier from a supermarket to fall within one of these categories.
Yeah.
And that becomes much more concerning at that point.
Yeah, so thinking about ranchers, their products must be raised on range grasses and plants. That's interesting because that sounds almost organic, right?
Yes.
So, but there's no, that's not
Right.
the same. Organic and local are not necessarily the same. So I think you're right. It's interesting. We could imagine that there's some kind of narrative misalignment because the local is emphasized in the mission, and yet the badges don't directly say local. And they also imply ownership, which has nothing to do with being local. You could live here and not own the land in which you live and legitimately farm.
Right.
So that's unfortunate. And they also have this education piece, which you imagine if that's what the mission of the farmers market is, to educate, then where are the materials and the collateral, and where are the conversations being had that do educate people on what is meant by local food? And I think that is notably not consistently achieved.
Yeah, and there is a common understanding that education happens at the level of the purveyor at a booth, communicating, interacting, connecting with their customers or their consumers. And we're compelled by that. But at the same time, the consistency and the reality of how that plays out over time is something that we want to continue to be aware of and to help further bring some substance to it.
I think it's problematic to imagine that any individual micro entrepreneur has the onus upon them to articulate the story in a language that may not be their own, which happens a lot here in Southern Arizona. It could also mean that they have to have the sophisticated jargon about markets to have a conversation. And that's putting a lot of pressure. So you have to be a great farmer, and you have to be able to figure out where to sell your products and who is attracted to your products. And then you have to educate them on why they should care about your products. And you may have to do so in a language that is not your first.
Yeah.
So all of this is kind of adding complexity and pain points.
And all in real time.
In real time. So if we think about the sustainable regional farm economy, which is what Heirloom Farmers Market wants and is achieving in some capacity, but not quite. We also see that there's this local farmers, chefs, foodies, and all sorts of other kind of craftspeople that come together to support this local economy and to protect our beautiful desert. So now protecting our beautiful desert wasn't in the mission before. So this is an added element, right? You have to be a local farmer or a local rancher or a local producer of some sort. And then you also have to actively protect your beautiful desert. So those are that's a lot. I mean, we're putting a lot of pressure on each individual market actor.
And market. This is an interesting, our work has taken us beyond Southern Arizona.
Correct.
To some other areas in the Southwest. And so this is not a market specific observation. This is a field level phenomenon.
Yes. And we might even argue that Arizona is ahead of the game.
Oh, I think so. I think we have some of the most progressive farmers markets that are quite amazing in comparison. So our critique is not of the farmers markets at all.
Of here, no,
but rather our critique is of how the local food movement is being played out in these market spaces and where there's opportunity to rethink things.
Yeah, and putting pressure on which market actors.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So we're seeing that there's alignment between what they say on the website and what the organizer's statement is, but there's a misalignment in the fact that now, instead of just being people who are great farmers, they have to educate people and they have to be really good at communicating a value proposition that isn't being scaffolded and supported by others.
Yes.
And that's kind of where we are with our critique. Maybe we should do something with that. And to look at this again, we can see that some people are stewarding this narrative, and they're taking a lot of time and effort to articulate this value proposition to people. And we see this local egg purveyor that says, I make it as clear as I can where I farm and how I farm in ways that are ecologically sound, safe, and sustainable. So if you just that, they've taken this task on, and that is a wonderful task to have taken on. But now suddenly you are educating people on what's ecologically sound, what farming practices are, and how they may or may not be ecologically sound, and what sustainability is. And so again, we're putting a lot of pressure on market actors to be really good at many, many things. And we're turning to some institutional forces in order to make this happen.
I think the other piece of that too is in terms of the pressure that is being put on the farmers or the producers themselves, is also by taking these causes on and these qualities on, they're opening themselves up to scrutiny as well.
Yeah.
And they very well could be and likely are up to that task, but yeah, it's one more task.
Yes. So if we turn our attention to perhaps a larger scale purveyors, and in this case, anyone's guess where this might be. It says, yes, I have local growers, right? The person who runs this particular supermarket. That's what SM stands for. We've identified them as supermarket produce
Yeah,
manager.
that is not a farmer's market,
That
for
is not
sure.
a farmer's market.
Yes.
It's inside. It's inside. Those some
Yeah.
farmers markets are inside. And they're saying that this is local growers, and we do so good because we have it's good for business. We have consumers that want local, and they sort of define this for you: non-GMO, local, etc. So non-GMO is not the same as local. That's a very different process. And we put them together in this quote. It's being put together. Local is defined as being produced within 500 miles of the store or around here, which is 914 miles.
For cheese.
For cheese. And it says we're proud of our local foragers. So the people who go out and source the materials that go in their local section are called local foragers, and sometimes local yokel, which is sort of a negative understanding of what that task is. And that task is to be lauded. It's a wonderful thing that they've done, found this local stuff and helped businesses. And it's interesting that they kind of conversation is about the best local products all over the map, which again undermines the local part.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we think about this, the local firms are agreeing to sell through the supermarket this local food, and they're abandoning the narrative about it being local, and they're appropriating that local food movement. You want to take this?
Yeah, so narrative neglect and misalignment, we can see more of this in the farmers market settings as well. So here's a quote from a jam purveyor that really makes no claims to tracing heritage to the region. And I think when I'll read the quote and then share a little bit of context in terms of what I think is going on here, is I use local fruit like prickly pear and ingredients like mesquite honey to offer flavors that are native to this place and have been used by the people here for literally thousands of years. And so that's a quote that is common reflected in the field work that we've done and the conversations that we've had, but it's not reflected in the way that we see the booths set up and we see the materials that are used to position and to describe and convey the meaning of the foods and products being sold. And so the neglect is that we're prompting or we're probing this and we're talking about it, and that's in the hearts and minds of many of the micro entrepreneurs and local food people that we talk to, but it's not being showcased in the stories that they're telling unless they're prompted to do so. And we're sympathetic to that because, again, they're not marketers, they're not branding experts. Like, you look at whether we like the story being told or not, if you look at some of the supermarkets, they're on, they're tight, they're consistent. Whether or not they're consistently right or wrong is up for others to decide, although we have an opinion on it clearly. But it's the misalignment and the neglect that comes out
And they're not saying anything about why handcrafting is important, or
Yeah, oh,
why
right,
it's
right.
important to take the time to do the same kind of processes that have been
Yeah,
done here.
Right. And that feeds
thousands of
into
years.
one of the things that clearly becomes an important thread that's woven throughout, is that it's almost like this aesthetic appeal then. It's like, oh, it's local. It's has an element of heritage. And so it's aesthetically pleasing to me. There's so much more to it than that. And that's what we're trying to tease out.
And this is a local CBD products purveyor. It's locally crafted, organic, vegan. So good to know. Natural, pet safe, small batch, lab tested. The value proposition here, not clearly articulated. It's a lot of things, right? Locally crafted, organic, vegan. Because a lot of people wonder if that, I mean, they question, everybody, there are people looking for vegan, and this is giving us that natural, which I'm not really sure what natural is meaning here, but interesting. So all of this means that, again, we're not really clear on what the value proposition is, or what it means to be local, or why local, vegan, and natural have to all be, and pet safe have to all be lumped together, because I'm guessing that those are different. So this idea of single source is something that they talk about, but don't make a big deal. So single source, it all happens right here.
Yeah, I do think there's an opportunity here.
Yes.
Where Hopi said, all natural, I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure what it means in this case, but I'll take a guess. And that it's probably a shout out to organic, but they can't say so. Right. Because they are not certified to say so. But they do say organic. They do. I can't read. Oh,
but I mean, that's usually what we see. But in this case, they do. And pet safe. I like pet safe. We all want our pets to be safe. It's just interesting. It's all lumped together, and it's not given any clear understanding of why this is that way and how it relates to the competition. This one I like too, because this is about making products with love. And I like love. You like love. We all like love. Love is a good thing. I'm just not really sure what that means. Does that mean with more attention to detail? Does that mean with more heritage sensitivity? Does that mean that we are going to include diverse, equitable, include all the people that had something to do with? I'm not sure exactly. It doesn't mean we're not going to harm people. And I think that might be what it means. A powerful word, love, might mean that we just don't hurt people when we produce this.
When I think about it, and I hear you talk about it, Hope, is like, to me, I'm not really so concerned about what it is that they love. It's more so, how do we know what that is? And that it is leaving open this wide open interpretation. And I think that's symbolic of what we're getting at, is that there's so much room for interpretation, and there's so much room for placing different meaning in different areas. I was just laughing because I was going to say, if you're paying for love, that was exactly how I was going to start that conversation. And I continued, even though I knew it was not my best plan. But you're paying for something called love, and we don't know what it is. Yeah. Right? But you decide what it is. Yes. And open text. That leaves this local food narrative open, and not just open for interpretation, but also open for hijacking. You said annihilation. And again, that's, excuse the pun, but that's not an untold story, right? It's like organic food that story has played out. And I worry mostly about the farmers and the producers and their sustainability and viability in this space that is quite literally the Wild West. Can I also ask what local love would be as opposed to other? Well, I guess it's a wordplay, but it could be love of local, right? Love of place. Love. Yeah. It could be. Yeah. Sorry, we're gonna argue about this amongst ourselves. Yeah, it's gonna get ugly later. Okay. Yeah. And so if we're thinking about how could a large scale supermarket take those ideas of love and local and organic, or clearly or nearly organic, pet safe, any of these things, we can see that they play with that. They use the word local all the time. You can see in the top picture that actually is a local manufacturer. But the one on the bottom, I believe, is less so. Yes, depending on how we define local. But thinking about
creating what is a consistent definition of local, and is it local that we are valuing, or is it heritage farming, making sure that we are true to the heritage of the space, or are we making sure it's sustainable, that we can continue to farm here? I think thinking through how we can help perhaps build better definitions that people can react to and decide whether they're going to pay more.
Cool.
Cool. All right. So here, that gets to
Yeah.
like linking it back to our.
One of the points that I just wanted to use as a segue into some of the pieces in the exhibit that inspired us is that, I'm particularly sensitive to the idea that our goal in this work, beyond the scholarship itself, is to try to bring greater understanding to the complexity of the storytelling process in a very nascent market space that is underpinned and anchored in some very important causes, some very pressing issues, and it is not a critique of the people who are doing the work, but rather what can be brought to the table to help them better tell the story and compel more involvement and stewardship and activism and synergy around some of our more pressing problems, ironically enough, that are not local, right? That they're very much global problems. But again, as the segue into the exhibit, this is fascinating to me. And as Chelsea had said earlier, I love to bring my students to the museum to look at pieces and to be inspired to engage in analogy and metaphorical thinking in the way that they talk about the things they're passionate about and try to inspire others to share some of that passion. Is when we look at patterns and trends of the vendors at farmers markets and the like, that they begin to look more like grocery stores. And as Hope said so astutely, and the grocery stores begin to look like very, very high-end farmers markets. And so I don't think you actually have to be a sophisticated marketer or have a sophisticated marketing team to get more specificity or power to the story, but maybe you just have to look at unusual places.
Yeah.
And this exhibit is a fabulous example of that, because when we look at some of the pieces and how they've been clustered and organized and talked about, and the descriptions of the pieces were just so beautiful and thoughtful that people in our community had applied to the exhibit. So I hope everyone gets a chance to look at those, but they align with the value propositions of the local food movement.
And what's also interesting is how beautiful the food is as it's depicted in this art. It's the aesthetic, the beauty of it is enhanced in ways that it doesn't allow you to in a grocery store, perhaps. And what's interesting is one of the things that is really good about local food is that it has a better taste. And interestingly enough, not part of the value proposition that they are usually selling.
Right. And it is also interesting to think of this parallel, and it's not universal, but there are a lot of commonalities between the life and the challenges of the local food producer, farmer, craftsperson, and the artist.
Yes.
Right. So this is actually a not so unusual parallel.
Right. So when an artist becomes successful enough, they can have a manager, right? And so, but a micro entrepreneur rarely gets that until they can scale up much further.
Right. Which becomes that important synergy between the marketplace and the vendor themselves. Yeah.
I think also something interesting about local food is it's an opportunity to think about food and where it comes from, and to not see meat only in saran wrap, right? But to imagine that an actual living creature offered this potential nutrient for you. And that's something that I love this piece, because it really highlights the distance between what we imagine we eat and where it actually comes from. And I think that's really interesting. I thought they did a really nice job with this being very clear. And I can share with you, it's very, very rare that people can look at the meat that they're going to eat and identify where it came from on an animal. So it came from exactly there. I mean, every once in a while you can with like a wing chicken or something. But if we're,
Yeah.
so as we get further away from the most obvious sources, it becomes rather difficult.
I like this piece too, compare it relative to our work, is because I think the story is pretty clear here.
Yes.
Actually, but there's enough imagination where it pulls you in. But I think the meaning with a little bit of reflection becomes quite clear. And that's a great aspiration point for some of the things that we think could happen in the local food market moving forward.
And maybe, making a clearer connection between what we eat and where it comes from. I also like this one a lot because first of all, just for those of you who have not seen it, it is actually not a plastic bag. It is made of ceramic. I believe it's a paper mache. It's really cool looking, right?
Yeah.
And totally. The idea
they were all really cool.
They're all cool. But the idea here is that we are seeing the sustainability portion of the local food movement. And yet many, many, many times when you go to the farmer's market, they stick the food into grocery bags, just like we see at the grocery store. And while they're telling you how sustainable this is. And not all people are doing this, and certainly not, and we're certainly not being, I just want to be mindful that they're mixing these value propositions very fluidly.
Well, and they're mixing settings.
Yes. Settings, because this looks just like
a grocery store, and in some cases,
we get from fast food,
right? And in some cases, they're recycling, right?
Yes,
so
which is good.
It is, but it's this idea of drawing distinctions and clarity of storyline. Yes.
Yeah. And then this thinking through imagining who worked on your food and what they brought to this market and how much we value and pay them for their services and respect them for the work that they've done, because it's tempting to imagine that only the landowner or the central micro entrepreneur did this effort, but most of the time they work with other people who are virtually unwritten into the text, and thinking about how we can bring that back. And ironically and sadly, I don't want to say ironically, sadly, these people tend to be of specific gender positions and of specific ethnicities and hues. We'll say hues.
Yeah, I found this piece to be exceptionally emotional. And I think it also speaks to the potential power and promise of local food in terms of bringing a sense of transparency and awareness to consumption, and why this is not just an intellectual exercise that we've embarked on. It's really, really important. And that's where our passion lies.
And if we're imagining that we're giving money to the local economy, we are imagining that we're giving money to other people who locally work in it.
Yes.
Yeah. This one was evocative.
Yes. Yeah.
The Last Supper is a pill.
a set of pills, right? The whole yes.
Yes, 10 to be. Could be. I think this is interesting because instead of highlighting the foodness of it, it's almost the alternative of gaining what you need from it without the food, without the aesthetic, without the hedonic nature of eating.
Very manufactured, very homogeneous, very, very consistent, clinical almost.
Without the taste of what this food would represent, and the eating together, the breaking of bread.
It's the removal of the human element is what I see for it.
And that's kind of part of our critique of what happens in the marketplace. Same with this one. We could imagine efficient eating, but efficient eating is and always has been part of a culture. And so taking it outside of that culture in the way that we typically do in these spaces when we're trying to articulate many, many value propositions is we don't articulate them well. So something.
And I think we also wanted to end on this particular image, because if you think about the way we've talked about local food or way we've observed it through our field work, and surely we would wholeheartedly agree there are other ways to interpret this. And there are things that we should be challenged on, as with any research, but the local food, the notion of local food is becoming kind of squished into a big old sandwich with lots of different parts, right? And we're arguing that we'd like to deconstruct that sandwich a bit more to really understand what it means and
Look at you, Matt.
Yeah,
Metaphoring.
what condiments are acceptable and which are not. Yes,
That's
but that's certainly where my mind went. And so, but these are just a slice of. All right, I'll get out of the sandwich metaphor. These are just a snippet of the many pieces of the exhibit
that you should
that are just amazing and inspiring and can't help but shape your thinking.
So when we're saying thank you, I think that we both want to really thank the micro entrepreneurs who gave us their time and allowed us to hang out and think about how they're marketing. They are working so hard, and we put so much pressure on those market actors to educate people, to come up with the greatest way to target their consumers, to be great farmers, to be great craftspeople. And I think that's a lot of pressure to put on certain market actors when we have a machine in that industrial space that has very separated skill sets and mobilization of a lot of resources. And I think that we mean only to figure out how we can help think through how local food can be better brought to the forefront in the value proposition space.
Yeah, and I think we're also very grateful and want to acknowledge the very hard work and the committed work that community organizers do around local food. And that's way too expansive to capture everybody, but you can imagine, the community food bank is one of the best in the nation, and local food is just such a huge part of what they do and the advocacy that they put out for our communities. Those that organize the markets that we visit and that we buy from and that we're inspired from. Again, it's not a critique of the markets. It's rather, where is there opportunity to contribute to the cause? The city of gastronomy is so important to our community, and that's not easy work. So that whole community collective that came around that initiative is such a special part of our community. And we hope that over time, the work that we're doing can help contribute to that momentum. And so,
and I know that this is going to be the least popular of the things. So later, Matt's going to say you shouldn't have said that, but I do want to say that for the supermarkets to make an effort to engage local producers is a path on the right direction. And it also is giving access to people who don't have the wherewithal to find and come to the limited hours of a farmer's market and have an experience that could be toward that. We only worry that that we might see the disenfranchisement of local as we did with organic.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure we will.
I'm in agreement.
Pretty sure we can. Oh, excellent.
Yeah,
that's going to save an argument later. So we want to say thank you. And thank you so much for the museum for letting us use the exhibit to think through our research. We really had a great experience with that. And I bet if there are questions, we would love to hear them.
Thank you both so much. That was an incredible talk. I don't think that I was quite prepared for all of the,
sorry.
No, it was, one of our themes is food for thought, and you've given me, and I'm sure everyone here, so much to think about. The issues of power and labor and hidden labor and how that plays into the local food marketplace and food systems. It's just really, it's also just really important. So thank you just so much. We are a little after 6, but we did have some great questions that came in the chat. So those of you that can stick around, I would love for you all to stay here and learn a little bit more. If Hope and Matt, you can answer a couple of the questions, and then I understand people have other commitments in the evening that they maybe need to.
Everybody's hungry now.
Yes.
It's dinner time.
That's right. I know. Right? Everyone's
At least it's dinner
now.
time here. Maybe it's breakfast somewhere else.
Yes, there's you mentioned it's kind of like you're offering some conceptual topics to think about, to be a little bit more critically aware, but there's also like the practical applications, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a couple of those questions that were really interesting. I'll find one of those. So one person was asking that how to get a hold of local farmers that produce food for restaurants. So restaurants and food producers, farmers connecting so that that food system, you know, kind of closes in on itself
Yeah,
and
so
supports each other.
Yeah.
I think there are ways in which you can do that, but the organization isn't yet there. It's not clear how you can make sure that you have those connections in place. I know there are some organizations that are working through that.
Yeah, and I think that honestly, it's going to the markets and talking to the people who are there. And if it's not their product, they are certainly connected to those that who could provide the product that one is looking for. Also, you know, our city, our region is so well connected and attentive to this that, you know, the community food bank certainly could have some ideas for that. The city of gastronomy just is probably the best resource in Southern Arizona, although I'm sensitive to the idea that they're confined to what it is that their mission is, and that may or may not capture everybody, especially when we start to think about local versus heritage and those types of things, but it's a good starting point.
I just want to point out that the fact that we are trying to figure out how to help is the problem. Because if we wanted to find a trainer in CrossFitting right now, if we were like, hey, I need a CrossFit trainer, there's going to be an archived, curated list of how to do that. And there's not here. So that's part of the problem, is that we don't have the infrastructure. If you want to see a dermatologist, we've got a list of dermatologists that are in the area. We don't have a list of people who are prepared with enough harvest to sustain a relationship with a restaurant.
Yeah, and you know, I'm also wanting to be very clear that we're aware of what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly would not claim to be the expert in the area of how to network with farmers or producers. So these are just ideas of where one would start, but it's
and the absence of it's an absence of a touch point that we can say right now, this is how you would do that.
Yeah, and there very well may be that touch point, and it could be a moment of where we should know, but we don't. Or it could be a case that that touch point is not there. And
I think we probably could find local farmers, but that have harvest enough to sustain is where I think we would fall apart.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And identifying the gaps is kind of the first step in identifying the solutions, right?
Yeah.
Great. So earlier on in your talk, someone asked, so are you saying that competitors in a local market are all local and need to talk more specifically about their story? I think this was in reference to the example you gave of the individual who was packaging their own tea and herbal.
Are we saying they should? So at the farmers markets, they go out and make sure that these people are local. They go and do farm checks or ranch checks, or in this case, production site checks, to make sure that's happening here. What we are arguing is that being able to articulate the value proposition, whether it's about their heritage or their persons as people who are skilled producers, or whether it's about how the monetary flows impact the local economy, that something needs to be said about why local is worth paying 3, 4, or 5 times as much as you may in some places. And we think it is. We'd love to have an opportunity to help them tell a story like that.
And yeah, it is also a sign of perhaps how local markets in general are thought of and understood, and who the actors are. And so Hope and I have been talking about bazaar marketing, and thinking not bizarre like how bizarre, but bazaars, and where you can imagine where there's room for micro entrepreneurs who are here, who are small business owners or micro business owners, and are doing things that are really meaningful and unique and important to our community, but may not necessarily be sourcing local or growing local. There should be space for that type of work. I think where we're going is when it comes to actually what is local food and how is that represented in any market, the differentiation of what is and what is not local specific to the food itself is where we're placing our primary empirical attention anyhow.
And thinking through, like, I love the idea. I was reading in chat about obviously the pivot produce
Pivot,
would
yeah.
help that.
Oh, it's
But
amazing.
what's kind of not there is how these local micro entrepreneurs can work together to be able to field these kinds of requests. So maybe me on my own, I can't do it, but having sort of a market platform that was more pulling across the micro entrepreneurs, which Pivot Produce does part of, but even pushing that further would be awesome.
And maybe just diversifying from produce to other products and thinking on from micro entrepreneurship to local food to localized food. You know, it's clarity, I think, and clarity of intent and clarity of output and outcome.
Yeah.
Complicated though.
Yeah. More complicated than we realize, right?
Yeah.
Really fantastic. Great things to think about. And then there was just one last question. It was just specific question, a very specific question. The picture at the beginning of the produce that included the kiwis, was that taken at a local Tucson area farmers market? Someone wanted to know. They wanted to know which one too, if you willing to share.
So no, no, we can't share. So we anything that's offered in the public, we can. In this particular picture, there are some other identifiers and some politics about why that would be difficult, and some accusations. Just to give you a sense, there are some accusations in the farmers market that people go to Walmart or someplace else and misrepresent the produce.
Yeah.
That's a non-trivial, and if that conversation continues and we facilitate that particular person who may or may not have done that may not be able to go sell their wares at the farmers market.
So
So
it's
Great. No, it's really a really important insight into your process and your research and how thoughtful and ethical you're being in that process. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So last question is, I think there's still quite a few people that are here, and I know people will come back and watch the Q&A when this video is on our YouTube page. You know, there's probably producers, farmers, micro entrepreneurs, and definitely consumers that are in our audience today. So if folks wanted to learn a little bit more, become more informed on this topic, where might they go?
Yeah, the classic answer is email us. Is that what you would say as well?
Well, now I was thinking there's all, yeah, well, yes, but I was thinking that we could sort of point them toward the heritage
Oh yeah, go ahead.
spaces. We might be able to help you, depending on which part you wanted to know. We can kind of point you to.
Oh, I thought they
if
were
it's-
talking about our work in particular.
Oh, our work in particular. Oh yeah, email us. But if
Is
it's
it
not
our
about
work or the work
in general about markets? I think
Either one, yeah. Wherever
Yeah.
folks might venture to learn a little bit more about this topic, these issues, these questions.
the heirloom market has a lot of collateral.
Fabulous.
It's fabulous collateral. We're a little, we're kind of looking at their badging, but the fact that their badging is
Yes.
amazing, and the fact that they are going out and doing these site visits and what they are doing for their process to say these are local for you is a lot.
Yeah, we're
And-
really lucky in Southern Arizona that our farmers markets are
Way ahead of others.
yeah, they're exceptional. So that would be a confident recommendation. I still think the City of Gastronomy website is one that is
Community food bank.
and the Community Food Bank has some interesting material and an amazing network. And certainly there are some local food celebrities
There are.
in town that are not hard to find. And that if you start just Googling local food in Tucson, you can start to kind of identify some people that are really passionate. Yeah.
There have been some magazines that really helped
Yeah.
articulate the value proposition, and they have since gone under, which is unfortunate.
Here, yeah.
Here they've gone under. So But there are still many of those people, Jared,
Yeah.
that would be happy to give you this kind of information. Yep,
Yep.
that's good. Yeah, the Center for Regional Food.
Oh,
Systems.
right.
Yes,
Oh, my
of course.
goodness.
Yes,
Yes.
of course.
Jeez, there's
Absolutely.
one building from where I live.
One building from where I live.
On campus. Yes, that is a fabulous. There's such great people in the Center for the
So committed.
Regional Food Studies in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Yes, so thank you for
Thank
that
you.
comment, because I would be horribly remiss
Yes.
for not referencing those folks in the great thought leadership that they're providing and advocacy and organizing.
Yeah, great. I mean, as you point out, in Tucson, there is quite a robust movement, and when it comes to this topic of food justice, food systems, local food. So it's hard to list all the organizations and people. But thank you so much, Paula, for mentioning the Center for Regional Food Studies for
Yes,
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
They were a partner in our exhibition and in some of the content too. So absolutely.
Amazing.
Well, Hope, Matt, thank you both so much. It's been absolutely fantastic, and I imagine that you might be getting a few emails after this as some very engaged listeners and audience tonight. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you
so
all.
much. We really appreciate it.
And hope everyone has fabulous meals this evening.
Yes.
Yes.
And every evening.
Yeah, and see the exhibit. It's fabulous.
Thank you.
Yes, please come see our exhibit. And thank you all for joining in tonight. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great night.